Panama Canal modernization, China's $500 million commitment to boost global trade. Date, February 3, 2025. Introduction. The Panama Canal, a pivotal trade route connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, is undergoing significant modernization efforts, particularly with China's recent $500 million investment aimed at enhancing its infrastructure and operational capabilities. This investment is not just a financial transaction, it signifies China's growing influence in the region and highlights the strategic implications for U.S. foreign policy. As global trade dynamics evolve, the modernization of the canal could reshape economic relationships and geopolitical strategies in the Americas and beyond. Historical context. The Panama Canal has been a cornerstone of international shipping since its inception in the early 20th century. The canal was constructed following the U.S. support for Panamanian independence from Colombia in 1903, culminating in the Hague-Novarilla Treaty, which granted the U.S. control over the canal zone. This control, however, bred resentment among Panamanians, leading to the Torrijos-Carter treaties in 1977, which established a timeline for the transfer of the canal to Panama. On December 31, 1999, Panama officially regained control, marking a significant shift in sovereignty. In recent years, the canal has faced challenges, including environmental issues like droughts that have limited its capacity and led to increased transit fees. These fee hikes have raised alarm among U.S. businesses that rely on the canal for shipping, prompting concerns from policymakers about the implications of rising costs and the strategic influence of China in the region. China's investment and strategic implications. China's $500 million commitment to modernize the Panama Canal comes at a time when its influence in Latin America is expanding. This investment aims to improve the canal's infrastructure, enhance operational efficiency, and potentially increase its capacity to handle larger vessels. Such developments could solidify China's foothold in a critical global trade artery, raising concerns in Washington about the strategic ramifications of Chinese investments in Central America. U.S. reliance on the canal for trade is significant. It serves as a vital link for goods transported between Asia and the eastern seaboard of the Americas. As China strengthens its presence through investments in ports at both ends of the canal, namely the Atlantic and Pacific terminals, questions arise about the potential for dual-use infrastructure that could serve military purposes. This situation has prompted U.S. officials to consider how to respond effectively to maintain influence and ensure security in the region. U.S. policy responses. The U.S. has historically wielded considerable influence over Panama, being its largest trading partner and primary source of foreign direct investment. However, U.S. policymakers are now grappling with a complex landscape marked by China's growing economic footprint. The responses to this challenge vary among officials, highlighting different approaches to counterbalancing China's influence. Some sources advocate for a diplomatic approach that seeks to engage Panama constructively, fostering cooperation without destabilizing the region. Others, however, reflect a more aggressive mindset, suggesting that the U.S. may consider military posturing to protect its interests. The divergence in these perspectives underscores the delicate balance the U.S. must strike between asserting its influence and maintaining stability in the Western Hemisphere. Key events timeline. 1. 1903, U.S. supports Panamanian independence and secures control over the canal zone through the Hague-Novarilla Treaty. 2. 1977, Torrijos-Carter treaties are signed, establishing a framework for the eventual return of the canal to Panama. 3. 1999, Panama officially assumes control of the canal. For 2023, droughts lead to increased transit fees, causing economic concerns among U.S. businesses that depend on the canal. 5. 2024, China announces a $500 million investment for the modernization of the canal, raising alarms in Washington. Challenges and future prospects. The modernization of the Panama Canal presents both opportunities and challenges. On one hand, enhanced infrastructure could increase shipping efficiency and capacity, benefiting global trade. On the other hand, the implications of foreign investments, especially from a strategic competitor like China, could alter the geopolitical landscape in Central America. U.S. policymakers are faced with a pressing question: how can the United States safeguard its interests while respecting Panama's sovereignty and fostering a cooperative relationship? The complexity of this situation requires careful navigation to avoid tensions that could escalate into broader conflicts. Conclusion: the modernization of the Panama Canal through China's substantial investment highlights the growing competition for influence in Central America and the strategic importance of this vital trade route. As the U.S. contemplates its response to China's expanding presence, it must balance its historical ties to Panama with the realities of a multipolar world. The future of the Panama Canal and its role in global trade will undoubtedly be shaped by these evolving dynamics, with significant implications for U.S.-Panama relations and broader geopolitical interactions in the Western Hemisphere. In this context, the modernization of the Panama Canal is not merely an infrastructure project, it is a battleground for influence, economic power, and strategic positioning that will resonate in international relations for years to come. The modernization of the Panama Canal, particularly through China's recent $500 million investment, brings several counterintuitive elements to light regarding global trade, U.S. foreign policy, and regional dynamics in Latin America. 1. China's investment as a strategic move. It may initially appear that China's investment in the Panama Canal is purely economic, aimed at enhancing trade infrastructure. However, this investment also serves a strategic purpose by expanding China's influence in a region traditionally dominated by U.S. interests. This dual purpose challenges the perception that economic endeavors are solely about profit maximization, suggesting that investments can also be leveraged for geopolitical gains. 2. U.S. concerns and the perception of threat. U.S. policymakers have historically viewed control over the Panama Canal as vital for national security and economic prosperity. However, the counterintuitive aspect is that the U.S. has limited viable options to counter China's growing presence without risking further destabilization in the region. The U.S. reliance on Panama for economic ties complicates the narrative that the U.S. can simply exert its influence to counter China's advances effectively. 3. Environmental factors impacting trade. The increased transit fees due to environmental challenges like droughts are a surprising twist in the narrative surrounding the Panama Canal. While one might expect a direct correlation between economic investment in infrastructure and improved operations, the reality reflects how external environmental factors can severely disrupt trade dynamics. This highlights the vulnerability of global supply chains to climatic changes, an often overlooked aspect in discussions of trade routes. 4. Historical grievances and modern sovereignty. The historical context of U.S. control over the canal and Panama's eventual reclamation of sovereignty is often framed as a narrative of liberation. However, the counterintuitive realization here is that Panama's sovereignty is now being challenged by Chinese economic entanglements, which could replicate a form of neo-colonial dependency. This raises questions about the true nature of sovereignty and independence in the modern geopolitical landscape. 5. Political rhetoric versus diplomatic reality. Trump's rhetoric about reclaiming the Panama Canal and potential military intervention contrasts sharply with the more diplomatic approaches suggested by other sources. This divergence illustrates a counterintuitive reality where aggressive posturing may not align with practical foreign policy strategies. The fear that such rhetoric could destabilize U.S.-Panama relations complicates the notion that strong statements equate to effective diplomacy. 6. Economic leverage versus strategic dependence. While the U.S. holds significant economic leverage over Panama as a major investor, the counterintuitive element is that this leverage does not equate to control. The emergence of Chinese investments complicates the U.S. position, as Panama may prioritize economic partnerships based on immediate benefits rather than historical alliances. This shift in priorities challenges the traditional understanding of power dynamics in international relations. 7. Neutrality treaties and military implications. The permanent neutrality treaty's obligations could be interpreted in varied ways, leading to a counterintuitive understanding of military presence and access. While the treaty aims to keep the canal neutral, the increasing Chinese economic presence raises questions about the potential for militarization, which could be seen as a violation of neutrality, yet might not elicit a strong U.S. response due to the complexities of international law and diplomatic norms. 8. Misinterpretation of transit fees. The discourse around rising transit fees often frames them as detrimental to U.S. shipping companies. However, the counterintuitive insight is that these fees reflect broader economic realities and environmental constraints and may incentivize innovation in shipping logistics and infrastructure. This perspective suggests that challenges could lead to opportunities for U.S. companies to adapt and evolve rather than merely succumb to increased costs. In conclusion, the modernization of the Panama Canal through China's investment is a multifaceted issue that reveals counterintuitive insights into global trade sovereignty and geopolitical strategies. The interplay of historical grievances, environmental challenges, and strategic investments complicates the narrative surrounding the canal's role in international trade and U.S. foreign policy. The dynamics at play suggest that traditional views of power and influence are being reshaped in the context of a rapidly changing global landscape. The report on the modernization of the Panama Canal and China's $500 million investment touches on several critical and often overlooked aspects that are significant for understanding the broader implications of this development. Below are key points that merit further attention. 1. Historical context and sovereignty issues. The historical narrative surrounding the Panama Canal is essential in understanding current geopolitical dynamics. The U.S. control over the canal initiated a legacy of resentment in Panama, which has evolved into a complex relationship that is now being tested by foreign investments, particularly from China. The significance of this is that it highlights a long-standing struggle for Panamanian sovereignty that could be exacerbated by foreign influence. U.S. policymakers must recognize that any aggressive stance may not only backfire but also renew anti-American sentiments that could destabilize the region. 2. Environmental factors and economic pressures. The report indicates that environmental challenges, specifically drought, have led to increased transit fees at the canal. This interplay between climate factors and economic decisions is often overlooked. The rising costs could compel shipping companies to seek alternative routes, which would diminish the canal's strategic importance and impact global trade. Understanding this connection is crucial because it influences not only economic stability in Panama but also the U.S. shipping industry's competitiveness. 3. China's strategic investments. While the report mentions China's investment in ports at either end of the canal, it is significant to explore the implications of this dual-use infrastructure. The concern is not merely about economic control, it also involves the potential for military applications. This aspect is often understated but carries severe implications for regional security and U.S. foreign policy. The presence of Chinese companies could enable China to exert influence over a critical maritime choke point, leading to heightened tensions in U.S.-China relations. 4. U.S. domestic political landscape. The rhetoric from U.S. political figures like Donald Trump is often viewed through a lens of nationalism and strategic posturing. However, the domestic political implications of such statements can have far-reaching consequences. They may rally support among certain voter bases but also risk alienating allies in the region. The significance lies in recognizing how domestic political considerations can influence foreign policy and the potential need for a more nuanced approach that balances domestic interests with international stability. 5. The role of multilateral diplomacy. The report highlights divergent U.S. strategies in response to China's influence. Engaging in multilateral diplomacy could be a more effective means of countering Chinese investments and fostering regional stability. By working with allies in international organizations, the U.S. can advocate for shared values and standards that would mitigate the risk of a unilateral approach by China. This aspect is often overlooked in discussions that focus on direct competition. But it underscores the importance of collaborative strategies in a globalized economy. 6. Legal framework and treaty obligations. The discussion around the Permanent Neutrality Treaty and other legal frameworks governing the canal is significant. The U.S. has considerable leverage, but the interpretation of treaty obligations could lead to disputes. Overlooking the legal complexities could result in miscalculations that may provoke crises. The U.S. must navigate these legal intricacies carefully to avoid potential violations that could escalate tensions with Panama or China. 7. Long-term strategic planning. The report emphasizes immediate concerns regarding China's investments but glosses over the necessity for long-term strategic planning. The dynamics of global trade are shifting, and the U.S. must consider how to maintain its influence in an evolving landscape. This involves not only addressing current issues but also preparing for future challenges related to trade routes, environmental changes, and geopolitical shifts. 8. Impact on regional dynamics. The modernization of the Panama Canal and the influx of Chinese investment could alter regional dynamics in Latin America. Countries may feel pressured to choose sides, leading to a fragmentation of alliances and increased competition for influence. The significance of this potential shift must not be underestimated, as it could create a ripple effect throughout the continent, impacting U.S. interests and relationships in other nations. In conclusion, the modernization of the Panama Canal and China's investment in its infrastructure presents a complex web of political, economic, and environmental issues. The nuances surrounding U.S.-Panama relations, the historical context of sovereignty, the implications of foreign investments, and the potential environmental impacts are significant elements that warrant deeper exploration. By acknowledging these often overlooked aspects, policymakers can better navigate the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead in this strategically vital region. 1. Strategic importance of the Panama Canal. The Panama Canal has historically served as a vital conduit for global trade, particularly for shipping between Asia and the eastern ports of the Americas. Its significance is reaffirmed by current geopolitical tensions, especially given the challenges it faces, such as increased transit fees and environmental issues like droughts. The canal's efficiency makes it irreplaceable, as alternatives like overland transport or navigating Cape Horn involve higher costs, longer transit times, and greater environmental impacts. The U.S. has a vested interest in maintaining its influence over this critical trade route, given that it is the primary user of the canal. 2. China's growing influence and investment. China's $500 million commitment to modernizing the Panama Canal underscores its expanding influence in Latin America. Chinese companies like Landbridge Group and C.K. Hutchison Holdings have established a strong presence in the region, operating ports at both ends of the canal. This raises concerns about dual-use infrastructure, where civilian facilities could potentially be leveraged for military purposes. The strategic implications of China's investments prompt debates in the U.S. about how to respond effectively while balancing diplomatic relations and regional stability. 3. U.S. policy responses and geopolitical implications. The U.S. faces a complex challenge in addressing China's growing influence over the Panama Canal while maintaining its strategic interests in the region. There are divergent views on how to respond. Some advocate for a diplomatic approach to counterbalance Chinese investments, while others suggest a more militaristic stance. Trump's recent rhetoric, which hints at potential military intervention, reflects the heightened tensions and underscores the necessity for the U.S. to navigate its foreign policy carefully to avoid destabilizing the region and undermining decades of diplomatic efforts. 4. Legal and treaty obligations. The historical context of the Panama Canal, rooted in U.S. intervention and subsequent treaties, adds a layer of complexity to the current situation. The Torrijos-Carter treaties established a framework for the canal's neutrality and management, which could be jeopardized by increasing Chinese influence. U.S. policymakers express concerns that Panama's reliance on Chinese investment could lead to breaches of these treaty obligations, particularly regarding transit fees and the canal's neutrality. This scenario raises the question of how far the U.S. might go to assert its interests and whether it could justify preemptive actions to ensure the canal's operational integrity and strategic stability. 1. Suez Canal Crisis 1956. The Suez Canal, like the Panama Canal, has been a vital maritime route for global trade connecting Europe and Asia. The Suez Crisis erupted when Egypt nationalized the canal previously controlled by British and French interests. The subsequent military intervention by Israel, the UK and France aimed to regain control over the canal but faced significant pushback from the United States and the Soviet Union, leading to a withdrawal of foreign forces. This event underscored the geopolitical significance of the canal. Similar to current concerns regarding Chinese influence over the Panama Canal. 2. The Korean War 1950 to 1953. The Korean War began as North Korea invaded South Korea, leading to a broader conflict that involved the United States and China. The war was heavily influenced by the geopolitical dynamics of the Cold War, with both superpowers seeking to expand their influence in Asia. The U.S. intervention was partly motivated by the desire to contain communism, much like the current U.S. concerns over China's investments and presence in Panama, which could shift the balance of power in the region. 3. Cuban Missile Crisis 1962. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a 13-day confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union over the presence of Soviet ballistic missiles in Cuba. This crisis was a peak moment of Cold War tensions, highlighting the strategic importance of geographical locations close to U.S. borders. The U.S. response involved a naval blockade and the threat of military action, reflecting a willingness to intervene in order to protect national interests. The parallels with the Panama Canal situation lie in the strategic importance of controlling key maritime routes and the potential for military intervention in response to perceived threats from rival powers. The modernization of the Panama Canal, particularly through China's recent $500 million investment, is poised to reshape global trade dynamics significantly. This commitment indicates China's strategic interests in Latin America and its intent to bolster its influence in critical maritime routes. As we look toward the future, several predictions can be made regarding the implications of this investment, the potential response from the United States, and the broader geopolitical landscape. 1. Enhanced trade efficiency and volume. The modernization efforts are expected to enhance the operational efficiency of the Panama Canal. Upgraded infrastructure, including improved locks and navigation systems, will likely increase the canal's capacity to handle larger vessels more efficiently. As a result, we can anticipate a surge in trade volume passing through the canal, further solidifying its status as a vital artery for global shipping, particularly for trade between Asia and the Americas. 2. Shifts in geopolitical alliances. China's investment may lead to a realignment of geopolitical alliances in the region. As Panama benefits from infrastructure improvements and increased trade revenues, it may lean more towards China, potentially at the expense of its historically close ties with the United States. This shift could encourage other Latin American nations to reconsider their alliances, particularly those already engaging with China through the Belt and Road Initiative. 3. Increased U.S. strategic concerns and military posturing. In response to China's expanding influence, the United States is likely to adopt a more proactive stance in the region. Expect heightened military presence and strategic partnerships with other Latin American countries to counterbalance China's growing footprint. The rhetoric from U.S. leaders may become more assertive, possibly invoking historical precedents like the Roosevelt Corollary to justify interventionist policies aimed at ensuring U.S. interests in the canal and surrounding areas. 4. Economic impacts and trade policy adjustments. The increased transit fees resulting from modernization efforts driven by environmental challenges such as droughts may prompt U.S. companies to seek alternative shipping routes or develop new logistics strategies. This could have a cascading effect on U.S. trade policies. potentially leading to negotiations aimed at making the canal more economically viable for American businesses. Simultaneously, Panama may have to navigate the delicate balance of maintaining its revenue from transit fees while avoiding alienating its primary trading partner, the U.S. 5. Environmental considerations. As the canal's modernization progresses, environmental concerns will likely become more pronounced. The canal's operation has significant ecological implications, and the impact of increased shipping traffic on local ecosystems will be scrutinized. Future modernization efforts may need to incorporate sustainable practices and technologies to mitigate environmental damage, which could influence global shipping standards and practices. 6. Rise of regional trade agreements. The dynamics surrounding the Panama Canal may spur the development of new regional trade agreements. Countries in Latin America could seek to strengthen their economic ties to enhance collective bargaining power against external influences, particularly from China and the U.S. This could lead to the establishment of trade blocs focused on mutual economic interests, creating a more interconnected regional economy. 7. Potential for conflicts and tensions. The strategic importance of the Panama Canal means that competition for influence could lead to tensions between the U.S. and China. As both nations vie for control over this critical trade route, we may witness an escalation of diplomatic conflicts, economic sanctions, or even military posturing. These tensions could destabilize the region and prompt discussions about international governance and regulations regarding the canal's use. 8. Technological innovations in shipping. The modernization of the Panama Canal may coincide with broader technological advancements in shipping, such as automation, digital navigation, and eco-friendly vessels. As the canal adapts to these innovations, it may set new standards for global shipping practices, influencing how goods are transported internationally and potentially leading to a shift in shipping industry norms. Conclusion. The future of the Panama Canal, influenced by China's substantial investment, will be pivotal in shaping global trade dynamics and geopolitical relationships. As the canal modernizes, it will not only enhance trade efficiency but also spark a series of strategic responses from the U.S. and other nations. The interplay of economic interests, environmental considerations, and geopolitical maneuvering will determine the canal's role in the international arena in the coming years. As we move forward, the implications of these developments will be felt not just in Panama but throughout the entire global trading system.